Steam curled from abandoned coffee cups as fluorescent lights hummed their tired song overhead. The midnight diner held its breath. Hunter Blake slouched in torn denim and a faded flannel shirt, stubble shadowing a face carved
Is
by
there
too many
something
sleepless
wrong with the
nights
coffee?
guarding empty office buildings. His weathered fingers found the familiar weight of an old military coin buried deep in his jacket pocket. Muscle memory from darker days when sleep brought only screams. 3 men in tailored suits moved like predators through the cramped space, their polished shoes clicking against cracked linoleum. The woman at table 4 trembled, her journalist's notebook clutched against her chest like armor that wouldn't hold. When the lead suit's shadow fell across her pale face, something prehistoric awakened behind Hunter's bloodshot eyes. His spine straightened, his pulse steadied. The harsh light caught a metallic glint as his jacket fell open. "Wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen." The words dropped into silence like stones into still water, each syllable sharp enough to cut glass. They turned to see nothing but a broken-down father in thrift store clothes. They couldn't have been more wrong. 6 hours earlier, Hunter's alarm clock screamed at 4:30 in the morning, its shrill cry cutting through dreams of desert sand and gunfire. He rolled out of bed, muscles protesting after another 12-hour shift at the warehouse district. The cramped apartment smelled of instant coffee and unpaid bills, shadows dancing across peeling wallpaper in the dim light. Harper's bedroom door stood slightly ajar, her 8-year-old form curled beneath a patchwork quilt their grandmother had sewn years before the cancer took her. Hunter paused at the threshold, watching his daughter's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep. Dark circles rimmed her eyes even in slumber. Too many nights she'd woken to his screams echoing through thin walls. The kitchen faucet dripped its familiar rhythm as Hunter counted the remaining bills in his wallet. $17.32. Harper needed new shoes for school, the soles of her current pair held together with duct tape and hope. He stared at the eviction notice taped to the refrigerator, red letters bold against white paper like blood on snow. 3 days. That's all they had left before the landlord changed the locks and threw their meager possessions onto the street. Hunter's fingers found the military coin again, its edges worn smooth by countless anxious moments. Staff Sergeant Hunter Blake, 82nd Airborne. 3 tours in Afghanistan. A lifetime ago, when he believed protecting people meant something. "Daddy?" Harper's sleepy voice drifted from the hallway, her bare feet padding across cold linoleum. She wore an oversized t-shirt with a faded unicorn on the front, her blonde hair sticking up at impossible angles. "Why do you have the sad face again?" Her small hand slipped into his, warm and trusting despite everything life had thrown at them. Hunter forced a smile, the same practiced expression he'd worn through countless parent-teacher conferences and medical appointments when the nightmares got too loud. "Just thinking about boring grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Harper's brown eyes, so much like her mother's, saw through every lie he told. The morning routine unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of survival. Cereal with milk that would expire tomorrow. Backpack checks for homework she'd completed by lamplight while he worked his 3rd job delivering pizza until 2 in the morning. Harper's chatter filled the silence, her voice bright with the kind of hope only children possessed before the world taught them better. She talked about the art project due next week, how she planned to draw superheroes who looked like real people instead of the perfect figures in comic books. "Like you, Daddy. You're strong even when you don't feel like it." Hunter's throat tightened as he braided her hair, his calloused fingers gentle against her scalp. The school drop-off line stretched around the block, a parade of minivans and SUVs driven by parents who didn't count every dollar twice before spending it. Harper kissed his cheek before climbing out of their battered Honda, her backpack nearly as big as she was. "See you tonight, Daddy. Don't forget to eat lunch this time." She skipped toward the school building, her broken shoes carrying her forward with the resilience that broke Hunter's heart daily. He watched until she disappeared through the double doors, then drove toward another day of honest work that barely paid enough to keep them afloat. The radio played country songs about better times, while rain began to spatter against the windshield like tears he couldn't afford to shed. Hunter arrived at the diner just as the midnight shift ended, his security uniform wrinkled from sitting in the car during his round. The Sunset Cafe never closed, its neon sign flickering between pink and amber like a dying heartbeat. Inside, the familiar smell of grease and burnt coffee wrapped around him like an old friend's embrace. This place had become his sanctuary during sleepless hours when the apartment walls closed in and Harper's peaceful breathing couldn't chase away memories of roadside bombs and fallen comrades. The waitress, Betty, nodded from behind the counter, where she'd worked for 27 years. Her grey hair was pulled back in a bun that had survived 3 decades of late-night chaos, her eyes kind but tired from dealing with truckers' insomniacs and broken souls like Hunter. The corner booth called to him like it always did, its cracked vinyl seat molded to his body after months of 3 a.m. coffee sessions. Hunter ordered black coffee and dry toast, the same meal he'd eaten here every night for 6 months. His wallet felt lighter with each dollar spent, but this place cost less than the VA therapist who'd stopped returning his calls after insurance ran out. The coffee arrived steaming, bitter enough to keep his eyes open through the shift ahead. Hunter pulled out his phone, checking for messages from potential employers who might need someone willing to work any hour for any wage. The screen remained empty except for a photo of Harper grinning gap-toothed at her 7th birthday party, chocolate cake smeared across her cheeks like war paint of pure joy. Samantha Rivers entered the diner like a ghost trying to become solid again, her red hair tucked beneath a baseball cap that couldn't quite hide the fear in her green eyes. She chose table 4, her back to the wall with clear sight lines to both exits, habits learned from months of looking over her shoulder. Her laptop emerged from a worn messenger bag, its screen casting blue light across her pale features. She ordered chamomile tea and picked at a blueberry muffin, her attention divided between the screen and the parking lot, visible through rain-streaked windows. Hunter recognized the signs of someone running from something bigger than themselves. He'd worn that same haunted expression in the months after discharge, when civilian life felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit, and civilian problems seemed impossibly small compared to the weight of surviving when better men hadn't. The journalist's fingers flew across the keyboard, her story taking shape in careful paragraphs that could either save lives or end her own. She was investigating missing funds from veteran support programs, money that should have gone to housing and mental health services, but had instead lined the pockets of corrupt officials and their criminal partners. 3 sources had already gone silent after receiving visits from men who knew exactly how to make problems disappear. Samantha's editor had pulled the story twice, citing insufficient evidence and potential legal complications, but she couldn't let it die. Too many veterans were sleeping on the streets while the money meant to help them bought someone else's 3rd vacation home. Her tea grew cold as she typed, her wedding ring catching the light, a reminder of the husband who'd left when journalism became more dangerous than their marriage could survive. The first drops of real trouble entered with the 3:15 rainstorm, their expensive suits incongruous against the diner's blue-collar clientele. The lead man's silver hair was slicked back with product that cost more than Hunter made in a week, his smile sharp enough to cut glass and twice as dangerous. His companions flanked him with the casual precision of men accustomed to violence, their movements economical and threatening without appearing overtly aggressive. They ordered nothing but scanned the room with predatory interest, their attention settling on Samantha's table like hawks spotting wounded prey. Hunter's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips as instincts honed in combat zones screamed warnings his conscious mind had tried to forget. "Miss Rivers." The silver-haired man's voice carried the cultured accent of old money and older cruelty. each word precisely enunciated to maximize impact. Such dedication to your craft, working so late. We admire journalists who pursue truth with such tenacity. Samantha's fingers stopped typing but didn't move away from the keyboard, her knuckles white with tension that communicated more than words could express. The laptop screen reflected fear and defiance in equal measure, her story's headline visible. Stolen Honor: How Veteran Funds Disappeared into Private Pockets. The silver-haired man's smile widened, revealing teeth too perfect to be natural. Perhaps it's time to consider whether some truths are worth the price of pursuing them. Hunter's peripheral vision catalogued details without conscious thought. The bulge beneath the second man's jacket that suggested a shoulder holster, the way the third positioned himself between Samantha and the front door, how their leader's manicured hands rested on the table with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. The military coin burned against Hunter's palm as muscle memory stirred to life, tactical assessments flooding his mind despite years of trying to bury such thoughts. 3 targets: civilian environment, non-combatant to protect, multiple exit strategies compromised. His breathing slowed automatically, the first stage of combat readiness that had kept him alive through 96 patrols in hostile territory. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and he wasn't Staff Sergeant Blake anymore. He was just Hunter, a broken-down single father whose little girl needed him to come home safe. I don't know what you're talking about. Samantha's voice carried the slight tremor of someone trying to sound braver than they felt. Her chin lifted in defiance even as her hands shook. The silver-haired man chuckled, a sound like expensive whiskey poured over broken promises. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about Marcus Webb's unfortunate accident last month, or Jennifer Martinez's sudden decision to leave journalism for a nice, quiet job in retail. His fingers drummed against the table's surface with measured rhythm, each tap echoing like a countdown timer. Some stories have a way of writing themselves, Miss Rivers, and some writers have a way of disappearing from the bylines permanently. The second man's hand moved inside his jacket with practiced casualness, the motion subtle enough to avoid alarming other patrons, but clear enough for Samantha to understand the message. Her laptop screen flickered as her trembling finger accidentally hit the brightness key, the sudden flare of light illuminating tears she refused to let fall. Hunter watched her story scroll past. Names, dates, bank records, testimonies from veterans who'd trusted the system and been betrayed. Millions of dollars meant for housing programs, job training, mental health services, all diverted into accounts owned by shell companies linked to the 3 men now surrounding her table like vultures. The corruption ran deep, tentacles reaching into congressional offices and Pentagon contracts, protected by people who considered human lives acceptable casualties in their pursuit of profit. You have 24 hours to kill the story, the leader continued, his voice never rising above conversational level, despite the violence implicit in every syllable. Delete your files, forget what you think you know, and find a nice human interest piece about puppies or local bake sales. Something more, suitable for a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, choking off hope and leaving only the bitter taste of injustice. Samantha's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her life's work reduced to ones and zeros that could disappear with a single keystroke. Behind her eyes, Hunter saw the same expression he'd worn the day they told him his unit's translator had been found dead in a ditch outside Kandahar. The look of someone realizing that doing the right thing often came with an impossibly high price. The third man leaned forward, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of absolute certainty. Or perhaps you'd prefer to join your colleague Marcus in early retirement. I hear the weather's lovely in the cemetery this time of year. Samantha's breath caught, a small sound that might have been a sob or a prayer or both. Her finger traced the laptop's trackpad in small circles, cursor hovering over the delete button as if the machine itself could make the choice she couldn't bear to face. The story represented months of work, interviews with veterans who'd trusted her with their pain, documentary evidence of crimes that demanded justice. But justice meant nothing if she wasn't alive to see it served, and these men clearly had no qualms about adding another name to their list of silenced voices. Hunter's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. 6 years of trying to be invisible, to blend into the background of civilian life, to pretend he was just another struggling single parent with nothing remarkable about his past. But watching these predators circle an innocent woman like wolves around a wounded deer brought back memories he'd tried to bury, the oath he'd taken to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, the weight of responsibility that came with training and experience most people would never possess. His reflection in the diner's windows showed a tired man in thrift store clothes, but his eyes held depths these criminals couldn't begin to fathom. The coin's familiar weight grounded him as old training whispered tactical options through his mind like ghosts of battles fought and won. "Wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen." The words emerged from some primal place where justice and violence intersected, carrying 20 years of military discipline wrapped around an unbreakable core of moral certainty. The silver-haired man's smile faltered as he turned to face Hunter, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to confused irritation. "I'm sorry. Was someone speaking? I don't recall inviting commentary from the help." His eyes catalogued Hunter's appearance with the casual dismissal of someone accustomed to measuring human worth by bank account balances and social connections. Torn jeans, work boots held together with duct tape, flannel shirt with permanent stains from honest labor, nothing to suggest this was anything more than an aging blue-collar worker with delusions of heroism. Hunter's hands remained steady at his sides, but his posture had shifted into something older and more dangerous than his civilian clothing suggested. "The lady asked you to leave. I'd recommend listening." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd given orders in life-or-death situations, each word precisely measured to communicate absolute resolve without unnecessary escalation. The second man's hand moved further inside his jacket, fingers wrapping around metal that promised swift resolution to social problems. But Hunter's eyes tracked the movement with professional interest, his body language shifting almost imperceptibly into a combat stance that hadn't been used in 6 years, but remained encoded in muscle memory like a second heartbeat. "Is this some kind of joke?" The leader's manicured fingers tapped against the table with increasing agitation, his cultured veneer beginning to crack under unexpected resistance. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? What we're capable of?" Behind him, his companions exchanged glances that communicated years of shared violence, their body language shifting from casual menace to active threat assessment. The diner's other patrons began to notice the tension, conversations dying as survival instincts older than civilization whispered warnings about predators in their midst. Betty reached for the phone behind the counter, her experienced fingers finding the emergency numbers she'd memorized during 27 years of serving coffee to society's forgotten people. Hunter's right hand found the coin in his pocket, thumb tracing its familiar edges as tactical assessments flooded his consciousness. 3 armed men, probably carrying 9mm handguns based on the jacket bulges. Ceramic plates in the walls would stop most rounds, but ricochet patterns in this confined space presented unacceptable risk to civilians. Distance to cover: 4 feet to the serving counter, 7 feet to the kitchen entrance, 12 feet to Samantha's position. The silver-haired man's manicured appearance suggested desk work rather than field experience, but his companions moved with the fluid grace of professionals who'd solved problems with violence before and would do so again without hesitation. "I know exactly who you are," Hunter replied, his voice carrying undertones of certainty that made the leader's eyes narrow with the first hint of genuine concern. "Marcus Webb was a good man," Hunter continued, each word falling into the silence like stones into still water. served 2 tours in Iraq, came home to find the VA housing program had no money for his family, while administrators bought new cars with funds meant for homeless veterans. Jennifer Martinez spent 3 months documenting how mental health services disappeared while bureaucrats took vacations to the Bahamas on taxpayer dollars. The silver-haired man's face drained of color as Hunter recited facts that weren't supposed to exist outside sealed files and private conversations. They trusted people like you to help them transition back to civilian life. Instead, you stole their hope and sold it for profit margins. The second man's weapon cleared its holster with practiced efficiency, its black metal surface reflecting fluorescent light like liquid shadow. "That's enough," he growled, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone who'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Sit down, shut up, or join your veteran buddies in the ground." The gun's barrel tracked toward Hunter's center mass, finger resting against the trigger guard with professional discipline. Around the diner, remaining patrons scrambled for exits or dove behind furniture, their panicked movements adding chaos to an already volatile situation. Samantha's laptop screen cast blue light across her pale features as she watched ordinary Tuesday night transform into something from her worst nightmares. Hunter's eyes never left the gunman's face, his own expression calm as still water, despite the weapon trained on his heart. "You made a mistake coming here," he said, voice carrying absolute certainty that seemed to bypass logic and strike directly at primal fears. "This isn't some back alley where you can disappear problems without consequences. This is America, and some of us still remember what that means." His hand shifted almost imperceptibly inside his jacket, fingers finding familiar contours that had gathered dust for 6 years but remained ready when duty called. The military coin pressed against his palm like a talisman, connecting present moment to past purpose through bonds stronger than time or trauma. The leader's composure cracked completely as he processed implications he hadn't considered. "Who the hell are you?" Fear leaked into his cultured voice like water through cracked concrete, his predatory confidence eroding as Hunter's calm certainty suggested depths of experience that expensive suits couldn't intimidate. The question hung in recycled air thick with tension and the smell of cooling coffee, while outside, rain continued its steady percussion against windows that had witnessed 1,000 small dramas, but never one with stakes this high. Hunter's reflection in those windows showed a different man than the one who'd entered hours earlier. Shoulders straight, eyes clear, purpose burning bright after years of carefully banked embers. "Staff Sergeant Hunter Blake, 82nd Airborne Division." The words emerged with parade ground precision, each syllable carrying weight earned through blood, sand, and sleepless nights in hostile territory. "3 deployments to Afghanistan, 96 combat patrols, 0 men lost under my command." His hand emerged from the jacket holding not a weapon, but a worn leather wallet that fell open to reveal military identification and commendations that spoke of service beyond most people's comprehension. The coin caught fluorescent light as it rolled across the table's surface, its bronze surface engraved with wings and the motto, "All the Way," a promise kept through fire and darkness across continents and years. The gunman's weapon wavered as implications registered in minds accustomed to intimidating civilians rather than confronting trained soldiers. Hunter continued with relentless calm. "I spent 3 years learning how to neutralize armed threats in close quarters combat, how to turn improvised weapons against multiple attackers, how to protect innocent people from predators who think violence is the answer to every problem." His eyes found each man in turn, cataloging weaknesses and tactical options with professional detachment that suggested violence was a tool he understood intimately, but deployed with surgical precision. "I've been trying very hard to forget those skills. You're making that impossible." The silver-haired man's manicured hands shook as he reached for his phone, fingers fumbling with expensive technology while his worldview reorganized around new information. "This is impossible. Our intelligence said you were just some washed-up security guard with PTSD and money problems." The admission escaped before he could stop it, revealing surveillance and preparation that transformed random encounter into calculated hunt. Hunter's expression hardened as pieces fell into place. This wasn't coincidence, but orchestrated intimidation designed to silence Samantha by demonstrating what happened to people who helped her. His presence in the diner at this specific moment had been anticipated, his profile studied, his weaknesses catalogued by people who made careers from exploiting vulnerability. "Your intelligence was incomplete," Hunter replied, his voice carrying undertones of controlled anger that made the air itself seem to vibrate with potential violence. "PTSD doesn't make a soldier weak. It makes him dangerous when people he cares about are threatened." The second gunman's weapon tracked uncertainly between Hunter and Samantha, tactical training warring with new information that suggested this target might shoot back with significantly more skill than anticipated. Around them, the diner had transformed into a battlefield where coffee cups became improvised weapons and serving counters provided cover from crossfire that seemed increasingly inevitable. Samantha's fingers found her phone amid the chaos, thumb hovering over the record button as journalistic instincts overrode personal fear. This was the story beneath the story. Not just financial corruption, but the violence used to protect it. Not just stolen money, but the systematic intimidation of anyone who dared expose the truth. Her camera captured the silver-haired man's confession, the gunman's weapon. Hunter's military identification spread across the table like evidence in a trial that hadn't begun yet, but whose verdict seemed predetermined. The blue light from her screen painted everything in cold tones that made the scene seem like something from a movie rather than terrifying reality unfolding in real time. "Put the phone down," the third man commanded, his own weapon emerging from concealment with practiced smoothness. "Delete everything you recorded, or we'll delete you along with your story." Two guns now tracked between Hunter and Samantha, creating crossfire scenarios that would have challenged even experienced tacticians. But Hunter's breathing remained steady, his hands loose at his sides despite proximity to lethal force that could end everything in milliseconds. Training whispered options through his consciousness. Disable the closer gunman first, use his body as shield while engaging the second threat. Protect the civilian at all costs, even if it meant accepting unacceptable personal risk. "You boys picked the wrong night to play soldier," Hunter said, his voice carrying amusement that seemed wildly inappropriate given the circumstances. "I've been shot at by professionals. Taliban fighters who grew up with rifles in their hands, who knew every inch of ground they defended, who had nothing to lose and everything to fight for." He took a step forward, closing distance despite the weapons trained on him, with confidence that suggested either supreme courage or complete madness. "You're just criminals with expensive suits and borrowed authority. There's a difference." The leader's phone call connected as Hunter moved, his voice rising to near panic as he demanded immediate backup from associates who'd expected this to be routine intimidation rather than armed confrontation. "We have a situation at the Sunset Cafe. The target has military training. Send everyone." The admission confirmed what Samantha's investigation had suggested. This wasn't isolated crime, but organized conspiracy involving multiple layers of corruption and violence. Her finger found the record button as evidence piled upon evidence, each word potentially saving lives if she survived to publish what she'd discovered. Hunter's tactical assessment shifted as reinforcements became inevitable. Multiple armed opponents in confined space with civilian casualties likely. But some fights chose their own timing, and some lines couldn't be uncrossed once confrontation became unavoidable. His hand found the familiar grip of training and muscle memory, movements precise and economical as years of practice took control of conscious thought. The second gunman's weapon swung toward him with professional competence, but Hunter was already moving with speed that belonged to different world than midnight diners and civilian concerns. The first takedown happened with surgical precision, that spoke of countless hours perfecting close-quarters combat techniques. Hunter's left hand deflected the gun barrel away from civilian targets, while his right delivered a strike that shut down the gunman's central nervous system, like flipping a light switch. The weapon clattered across linoleum that had witnessed spilled coffee and dropped coins, but never violence, this swift and decisive. The second threat tried to adjust his aim, but found himself engaging someone who moved like water and struck like lightning, every motion economical and devastatingly effective. 20 seconds. That's how long it took for Hunter Blake to transform from broken-down security guard into something these criminals had never encountered, a professional soldier whose rules of engagement included protecting innocent people at any cost. The silver-haired man's phone flew from nerveless fingers as he found himself face down against the table, his arms twisted behind his back with mechanical precision that suggested resistance would result in broken bones rather than successful escape. Around them, the diner fell silent except for the sound of labored breathing and the steady drip of coffee from an overturned pot. Samantha's camera captured everything: the speed of Hunter's movements, the precision of his techniques, the transformation from tired father into lethal protector that happened too quickly for untrained eyes to follow. Her journalistic instincts screamed questions, while her human ones whispered gratitude for intervention that had probably saved her life. The laptop screen still displayed her story, but now it seemed like prologue to something larger and more dangerous than financial corruption. This was what happened when good men were pushed too far by evil ones who mistook kindness for weakness and silence for consent. Samantha. Hunter's voice carried calm authority, despite the violence that had just unfolded, his breathing barely elevated despite physical exertion that would have left most people gasping. "Call 911. Tell them we need police and paramedics at the Sunset Cafe. Tell them we have suspects in custody for conspiracy, extortion, and attempted murder." His hands secured weapons with professional competence, while his eyes swept the room for additional threats that training suggested might materialize. The silver-haired man groaned against the table's surface, his expensive suit torn and his predatory confidence replaced by dawning realization that he'd gravely underestimated his intended victims. Police sirens wailed in the distance as rain continued its percussion. Cushion against windows now spiderwebbed from impacts they weren't designed to absorb. Betty emerged from behind the counter where she'd taken cover, her experienced eyes taking in the scene with surprising calm, given the chaos that had just unfolded. "Hell, honey," she said to Hunter, her voice carrying admiration mixed with concern. "You've been holding out on us. That was something else entirely." Her hands shook slightly as she poured fresh coffee with automatic efficiency, muscle memory taking over when conscious thought struggled to process recent events. Hunter's reflection in the cracked windows showed someone different than the man who'd entered hours earlier, seeking only coffee and solitude. His shoulders carried military bearing that civilian clothes couldn't hide. His eyes held depths of experience that spoke of battles fought and won in places most people couldn't pronounce. But beneath the surface competence lay familiar exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but soul-deep weariness of someone who'd hoped his fighting days were over, but discovered that some fights were unavoidable when innocent people needed protection. The military coin rested on the table amid overturned cups and scattered papers, its bronze surface catching light from fixtures that had illuminated 1,000 quiet conversations, but never a confrontation this decisive. Hunter picked it up with reverent care, thumb tracing familiar engravings that connected present moment to past purpose through bond stronger than time or circumstance. Staff Sergeant Blake had been buried beneath years of civilian routine, but he'd never truly died. Just waited for a moment when duty called louder than personal safety or comfortable anonymity. "Is it over?" Samantha's voice carried hope mixed with disbelief as she saved her story to multiple cloud servers with journalists' instinct for protecting information that powerful people wanted destroyed. Her hands no longer trembled as adrenaline faded into exhaustion, but her eyes remained alert for dangers that might still materialize. Hunter's nod carried certainty earned through experience. With violence that most people only witnessed in movies, his calm presence suggesting the immediate threat had passed, even though larger battles remained to be fought. "The immediate danger is over," Hunter confirmed, his voice carrying authority that made Samantha's shoulders relax for the first time in months. But this was just the beginning. These men were foot soldiers in something much larger. Your story is more important now than ever. His eyes found her laptop screen, where evidence glowed like digital fire, names and numbers and testimonies that could bring down networks of corruption if they survived to see publication. The rain outside seemed to wash away more than just dust from windows. It marked a dividing line between before and after, between hiding and standing up, between comfortable cowardice and dangerous courage. Police vehicles filled the parking lot with red and blue light that transformed the mundane diner into something from a crime scene drama, their rotating beacons painting everything in alternating colors of authority and consequence. Officers entered with weapons drawn and tactical precision that suggested they'd prepared for multiple scenarios but hadn't expected to find suspects already restrained and waiting. Hunter's military identification lay beside his coffee cup like a business card from a past life, explaining competence that would otherwise seem impossible from someone in thrift store clothes and work boots held together with tape. Detective Sarah Morrison took Hunter's statement with professional competence, tempered by obvious curiosity about skills that didn't match his official employment record. Her questions probed gently at experiences he'd tried to forget, service records that painted pictures of heroism in places where heroes often died unmarked and unremembered. "You could have been killed," she observed, her voice carrying respect mixed with concern. "3 armed men against 1. Those aren't good odds for anyone." Hunter's smile held shadows of battles fought in worse circumstances against longer odds, memories of nights when survival depended on training, luck, and absolute refusal to let bad people win. "I had advantages they didn't know about," Hunter replied, his voice carrying quiet certainty that spoke of experience beyond most people's comprehension. They expected to intimidate a broken-down civilian with money problems and psychological issues. They found a soldier instead. The distinction mattered more than Detective Morrison could understand. Not just training or techniques, but mindset that transformed ordinary people into extraordinary protectors when circumstances demanded sacrifice for principles larger than personal safety or comfort. Samantha's story went live at 3:47 in the morning, uploaded from her phone while paramedics checked her for injuries and investigators processed evidence that would keep prosecutors busy for years. The headline blazed across news websites and social media platforms like wildfire. "Stolen honor. Veteran funds corruption exposed as armed men attack journalist." Comments began accumulating before the sun rose, thousands of voices expressing outrage at betrayal of people who'd served their country only to be robbed by those they'd trusted to help them heal. Within hours, arrests began across multiple states as federal investigators armed with Samantha's evidence moved against networks of corruption that had operated in shadows for years. Bank accounts froze, luxury homes were searched, politicians issued carefully worded denials, while lawyers shredded documents and formatted hard drives. But the truth had momentum now, amplified by social media and backed by evidence too comprehensive to dismiss or destroy. Veterans organizations rallied behind the story, their voices joining Samantha's in demanding justice for crimes that had stolen hope from people who'd already given more than most Americans would ever be asked to sacrifice. Hunter returned to his apartment as dawn painted the sky in shades of possibility. His clothes torn and his knuckles scraped, but his purpose clearer than it had been in years. Harper's door remained slightly ajar, her small form still curled beneath the patchwork quilt, but her breathing seemed more peaceful somehow, as if the universe itself had shifted overnight toward something resembling justice. He paused at the threshold, watching his daughter sleep, while morning light revealed a world where bad people faced consequences and good people found help when they needed it most. The eviction notice still clung to the refrigerator with magnetic determination, but Hunter's phone buzzed with messages from reporters, veteran advocacy groups, and potential employers who'd seen his story in the news. Staff Sergeant Hunter Blake, 82nd Airborne Division, had stepped out of comfortable anonymity into uncomfortable spotlight, but also into opportunities that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. The military coin rested on the kitchen counter beside Harper's latest artwork, a drawing of superheroes who looked like real people, with one figure who bore unmistakable resemblance to her father. 3 weeks later, Hunter reported for his first day as security coordinator for Veterans United, a non-profit organization that had offered him steady employment with benefits and purpose that aligned with his desire to help people who'd served their country. The salary would cover rent with money left over for Harper's new shoes and maybe even a few small luxuries that had seemed impossible during months of counting every dollar twice. But more importantly, the work mattered. Protecting facilities that provided real help to veterans struggling with homelessness, addiction, and mental health issues that civilian world often ignored or misunderstood. Harper's proud smile at the school pickup line was worth more than any paycheck as she introduced her father to friends who'd heard about the superhero dad from news coverage that portrayed him as ordinary person who'd done extraordinary things when circumstances demanded courage. "I told everyone you were special," she whispered as they walked toward their car, her hand secure in his. "I just didn't know other people needed to know it too." Hunter's throat tightened with emotion that had nothing to do with past trauma and everything to do with present hope for futures that seemed brighter than they had in years. Samantha's investigation continued from her new position at a major newspaper that had hired her based on the veteran corruption story and provided resources for her for deeper digging into systemic problems. Her desk overlooked the city where Hunter now worked, and sometimes as she could see the Veterans United building from her office window, a reminder that some fights were worth winning regardless of personal cost. Her Pulitzer nomination would come later, but the satisfaction of seeing corrupt officials led away in handcuffs was reward enough for risks that had nearly cost her everything. The Sunset Cafe remained open for business, its cracked windows replaced and its reputation enhanced by stories of the night when good triumphed over evil in ways that seemed almost too dramatic for real life. Betty kept Hunter's corner booth reserved during late hours when insomnia still drove him to seek solitude and black coffee. But now his visits carried different energy, not escape from unbearable present, but connection to purpose that made suffering meaningful. The military coin rested in his pocket, not as reminder of past trauma, but as talisman of continuing duty to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The rain that had drummed against windows during the confrontation gave way to sunshine that illuminated a world where journalists could tell truth without fear of violence, where veterans received help instead of betrayal, where fathers could show their daughters that heroes existed in ordinary places doing extraordinary things. Hunter Blake had thought his war was over when he left Afghanistan, but he'd learned that some battles followed soldiers home, not as enemies to defeat, but as opportunities to serve in different ways, with skills earned through sacrifice most people would never understand or appreciate. Harper's latest art project hung on their refrigerator, next to bills they could now afford to pay. Her drawing showing figures in military uniform standing beside others in civilian clothes, all holding hands beneath a sky colored with crayons labeled hope and safety. The eviction notice had been replaced by a lease renewal, but more importantly by sense of belonging that came from using hard-won abilities for purposes that honored both past service and present responsibility. The apartment no longer smelled of desperation, but of possibility, its walls echoing with laughter instead of nightmares, as healing finally outpaced harm. At 8 years old, Harper Blake understood that her father was special, not because he could fight when necessary, but because he chose to fight only when protecting people who needed protection. Her bedtime stories now featured heroes who looked like real people, because she'd learned that courage lived not in comic books, but in moments when good people decided that some things were worth any risk. And sometimes, late at night when rain drummed against their windows, she could hear her father sleeping peacefully. Dreams finally free from desert sand and gunfire, filled instead with images of tomorrow's possibilities and the knowledge that some fights were worth winning.